Underrated gets thrown around a lot these days, but I do think one new legend is criminally ignored. Oherexonal and Torbran and Solfim see tons of play, but none of them are good, in my opinion, as this uncommon legend from Marvel superheroes. And I'm talking about Hawkeye Young Avenger. She's fantastic, 4 mana, an uncommon, and is only 25 cents versus the nearly $30 of some of the legends that I mentioned previously. And she can make a killer deck on just $30. I've put one together and it might be my next forever deck. So I want to share with you this way to absolutely dominate your pod because Burn is back in Commander, baby. So Hawkeye is a damage scaler. Let's define that right away. Getting to add damage to non-combat damage you deal equal to her power. It is incredible for a few reasons. Let's look at her nearest one-to-one comparison of Oherexonal. Not only is Oher $30, but he replaces the damage you deal if it's less than his power, and only from red sources. That's a lot of significant details. If you deal 3 damage with Oher out, he increases it by 1 up to 4 his power. If you deal 3 damage with Hawkeye out, she increases that by an additional 2 because her base power is 2. Both scale with power boosts, making counters and auras and equipment extremely valuable, but Hawkeye will always increase the damage you deal, not true for Oher. Increasing damage from a colorless source isn't useless either, as Caltrops or Desert or Sunscorched Desert are all getting Hawkeye's power boost, but never Oherexonal's. And then you have additive effects like Torbran. Torbran, at the same mana value as Hawkeye, will always add only 2 damage to the damage of your red sources. That's linear, it never gets bigger, it's always 2. And that's fine, but it's going to put you firmly in the death by 1,000 cuts, but slightly larger cuts, rather than the true range of what I would call a burn deck. Damage doublers, like Solfim, are amazing when it comes to already dealing big bursts of damage. Solfim doesn't create those scenarios, just enhances them. That makes Solfim a great addition in the 99 of decks, but not so much at the lead of decks. And that's why Hawkeye is so good. Cheap, available, and can turn 1 mana spells that deal 1 damage into 20 damage easy enough. This $30 budget deck is my next forever deck. It's cheap, it's explosive, and it'll have your opponents wondering where it came from. Tell them Commander Mechanic sent you. Burn decks have always been tricky. You're trying to deal 40 damage to 3 opponents, as opposed to 1v1 formats when you're only trying to do 20 damage to 1 person. I've built a few of these decks and you might have seen me play a few of them, but there's a balance that needs to be struck, especially when it comes to a mono-red deck. Fortunately, this deck doesn't need sources that scale, since our commander scales them. We don't need a blasphemous act when we can take a boiling earth and turn it into a blasphemous act that leaves our creatures unscathed. Which is how we can build it, and wreck shop on such a tight budget. The deck's most expensive card is a Bolt Wave at $250. Everything else is just pennies. Have you ever wanted to take an opponent out with a Fiery Confluence? Or wipe the board with an Electrickery? How about destroy the table with a Goblin Chain Whirler? Well then, you are going to love this deck. It's divided very plainly into 2.5 categories. Category 1, cards that enhance our commander. Category 2, cards that deal damage. And Category 3 are nuts and bolts that hold the deck together. First, how are we scaling Hawkeye's power? Anything that increases her power is a direct increase to the damage we deal with non-combat sources. And, well, I guess with her attacks as well, though that's going to be a last resort. My first rule in this category, nothing can equip for more than 3. Hawkeye's mana cost at 4 isn't low, and being able to cast and suit her up right away is ideal. And if she gets removed and we have to recast her, we don't want to have to waste another turn just suiting her back up again. My second rule, the increase to power needs to be at least 3 or scale higher. This let me load up the deck with a few ways to go crazy with Hawkeye's power. Ace's baseball bat, grafted war gear, or the terribly bad but good in this deck cement shoes are all power increases that can turn 1 damage into 6 instantly. Hero's Blade and Piston Sledge also auto-equip and help to ratchet her power up fast. Wrecking Ball Arm is a great way to start counting from 7 rather than 2 and make her a mean attacker or blocker as well. but it's scaling that really goes crazy. Improvised Arsenal, Strata Scythe, or Bone Horde are all ways to have your commander's power hit double digits with very little effort. Golem Skin Gauntlets or Thran Power Suit help scale up once you have more equipment, making it onto your commander, with Power Suit adding the very valuable ward on top of all of the power boost too. But Chainsaw is a great way to overlap two of our categories, damage and power scaling, and to turn some of our bigger burn options that become board wipes into bigger power boosts with very little effort. Important note, Hawkeye herself is not dealing the bonus damage, unlike some similar effects like Gearson Starn. She's enhancing the damage of the spell or source itself, so while putting lifelink on a creature you control that is dealing damage can gain you a bunch of life, putting that same equipment on a Hawkeye isn't going to do much for you. Just a handy tip if you're building this yourself. Believe it or not, the equipment is the smallest part of this deck, as just about everything else is geared towards dealing some form of damage. Very efficient and reliable sources of 1 damage at a time in this deck turn into 7, 10, or more damage incredibly quickly. Now this category, damage dealers, is divided into 2 sources, creatures and spells, where we can start getting more reliable or more burst. Creatures are sources like my favorite little guy, Spear Spewer. While this guy's tap ability is symmetrical, meaning it deals damage to everyone, yourself included, Hawkeye's ability only deals damage to opponents or permanent opponents' control. So on tap, you might be taking 1 damage, but your opponents are taking like 17. But then you have spell pingers, dorks that deal a damage to each opponent when you cast an instant, sorcery, or in some cases non-creature spell. There's no shortage of these like Thunderdrum Soloist, Electrostatic Field, or Erebor Flamesmith, all examples that only trigger off of instants and sorceries. Thermo Alchemist and Unruly Catapult kind of fit into this category too, but require them to not be summoning sick to work. Coruscation Mage, Firebrand Archer, and Firespitter Whelp all trigger off of non-creature spells, meaning those equipment we talked about are all now opportunities to burn your opponents to the ground. Sorry, I don't know what got into me. Other options like Mage Bane Lizard are great for letting opponents tie their own noose. When they cast a non-creature spell, we get to deal damage to them. It's a fantastic rattlesnake to prevent a board wipe for fear of taking 12 damage to the dome. And Caldera Pyramaw is another one of these options at just a few cents. It scales really, really well once you start casting spells and throwing more and more damage around. Suit this guy up for even more damage on spell cast. Red also have what I would call an aristocrat effect too in Gimli Counter of Kills. When an opponent's creature dies, which we can control very well, Gimli deals a damage to that creature's controller. And naturally, in this deck, 1 damage is never just 1 damage. Then the last kind of creature in the deck are damage dealers themselves. Goblin Chainwhirler, Parapet Thresher, and good ol' Inferno Titan. Like Spear Spewer, these guys are ways to continuously throw non-combat damage around even if we have no cards in hand. They're extremely good, and extremely cheap in this deck. And on that note, when did Kessick Flamebreather hit $7 for a common? Is this a popper thing? Let me know in the comments if you've seen why this guy has spiked so much, because it baffles me. We then have our spells in the deck, another big source of reliable damage. This is what puts the burn in a burn deck, and we don't need to go big in this deck. Remember, 1 damage can become 16 damage easily enough. So, spells that deal damage to creatures and or players are very valuable in priority. Anything that deals damage deals more damage, so more things taking damage is more damage. What? Sorry, I've confused myself with that one. Dealing 1 damage to each creature your opponents control, like with a Blazing Volley, becomes a board wipe. It's easy to control the board and turn everything one-sided when you really need to. I've also put in Boiling Earth, Scouring Sands, and Barrage of Boulders that all do this same effect. That's essentially 4 board wipes. Electrickery, our instant speed option, does the same thing when overloaded for another option to wipe the board too. But even better are End the Festivities and Tectonic Hazard. These deal 1 damage to all creatures, all opponents control, and to each opponent. So casting this with an 8 power Hawkeye is 9 damage to all opponents and all creatures they control. light them up. If that fails, Mizium Mortars goes even harder and bigger, but is considerably slower of an option. But it is an option. Then we have targeted options. These are great to split up damage and take out tricky creatures, or go straight to an opponent's dome. Forked Bolt, Photon Blast Barrage, and Cast into the Fire are great targeted removal options, because sometimes you don't want to wipe out all of your opponent's creatures to make yourself a target. But it's Fiery Conclusion, or Violent Eruption, or Bolt Wave that are your game enders. Damage to each opponent is the way that you're taking everyone out, whether it be from spells or from creatures. One of the cards that I've ended the most games with is Classic Stormwind Con Grapeshot. Don't expect your storm count to get too high in this deck, but with Hawkeye's power high enough, you may only need to get that storm count to 2 in order to point a copy at each opponent. More copies are more good, since each copy gets Hawkeye's bonus damage for some massive firepower. Then lastly, we have our nuts and bolts of the deck: card draw and ramp and removal and utility. And these are difficult things for red to do normally. But this deck turns everything into removal, so we really don't need to focus too much on them apart from, say, Chaos Warp, to deal with permanents that we can't deal damage to. So we instead focus heavier on card draw, or looting as red prefers, meaning discarding a card to draw more cards. We have plenty of options like Demand Answers, Thrill of Possibility, and Big Score, but not Unexpected Windfall. That card's become a few bucks and now can't fit into an ultra budget deck like this anymore. We can also do what's called Impulse Drawing, exiling the top card of our library in order to play it, with a count on luck. I wouldn't run this anywhere other than a mono red deck, but it does work here. Ramp isn't a main focus of the deck since we run so low to the ground with an average mana value just over 2. We need that mana to cast or equip our commander instead, so I've included a Rodeo Pyromancers as a way for us to get some potentially bonus mana each turn. But the biggest utility is reusing our spells. Backdraft Hellkite and Return the Past give every spell in our graveyard flashback, which can let us play our greatest hits one more time. This is how you get that Grapeshot storm count up. I've played this deck multiple times now and I love it, but it's got some glaring weaknesses to be aware of. First, your commander is key, because redundancy for damage scaling is expensive, and this is a $30 budget deck. So keep a close eye on her, and not letting her get removed is essential. Upgrading the deck with a Deflecting Swat, Untimely Malfunction, or Swiftfoot Boots are all great potential directions to keep Hawkeye safe. There are no red gotcha spells to counter a board wipe, so keep your eyes open and plan ahead. Second, card draw is at a premium. Red isn't great at drawing cards. You typically need to have to discard a card and remain card neutral in order to improve your card options rather than draw a bulk of cards. I added in Pyromancer's Goggles to get more range from your burn spells and card draw spells by doubling them up, but you really need to be cautious about dumping your hand without safety. Third, along both previous points, overcommitting to the board is deadly. Just like playing too many spells, putting too many creatures in play can leave you stuck without being able to rebuild. You're one board wipe away from disaster. Your commander doesn't draw cards, so you need to be mindful of how much gas you have in the tank. But the strengths of this deck? It takes one good turn to win the game. You do not need Hawkeye out if you aren't planning on winning the game, so don't commit her to the board and suit her up without getting a good chunk of damage off of life totals for your troubles. I learned this lesson. If you come out swinging early and commit resources to dealing like 10 damage to each opponent, Hawkeye will be kill on sight all game long, meaning you need to pivot to death by 1,000 cuts rather than bursts of burn. But if you build up some ways to do chip damage, wait for opponents to pick at each other's life totals, then drop Hawkeye, suit her up, and cast a single spell to drop each opponent from 20 to 0, no one sees that coming. Be mindful of when you're attempting to burn everyone out. That's the mark of a good pilot of a deck like this. My best and biggest plays in this deck have often been just about biding my time. Hawkeye, with a big bone horde on it, can be 25 damage to each opponent for a single mana in a lot of instances. Making a few copies of Improvised Arsenal, dropping Hawkeye, and equipping her, then playing a land to let Sabotender deal 12 damage to each opponent, it happens a lot. casually casting a Bolt Wave through a Pyromancer's Goggles with an Electrostatic Field in play, and Hawkeye at base power 2 is still dealing 13 damage to each opponent without any power scaling tricks. For a $30 deck, this is a surprising way to break through board stalls, end longer games, and not have to play into the slugfest back and forths that Commander can devolve into. But what if you wanted to build this for more than $30? Let's take a look at the upgrade. And for game changers, the only one that I really look to add is Jeska's Will. Some ramp and or extra card draw is very helpful in any circumstance, though anything that doesn't deal damage is ultimately detracting from your ability to light everything on fire. Mana Geyser is another fine option for additional ramp too, though you aren't casting anything big in this deck. This is an option to be able to pop off, take advantage of one key turn, and end the game by playing out your entire hand all at once. Where I would recommend that you invest in priority is in cost discounters like Ruby Medallion or the Fire Crystal. Since we're in mono red, this is a cost reduction on everything we cast that's not colorless, and gives us the ability to recast our commander much more often. For other potential creatures, Longshot Rebel Bowman is a good add as another archer, dealing more damage when you cast non-creature spells and discounting them too, a great overlap of utility and damage. And Razorkin Needlehead is also a great addition to ensure that your opponents are taking damage on their turns without you needing to spend more mana. Remember, 1 damage turned into 19 damage wins you the game, and people can't help but draw cards in this game. Rampaging Ferocidon is another option here too. Punisher cards are powerful because Hawkeye's damage increasing ability doesn't affect you, just your opponents. Pivoting the deck to include Eidolon of the Great Revel, Zozu the Punisher, or Gleeful Arsonist take you from a burn deck into a Punisher deck, and that's a valid path to go as well. It's just going to be a more expensive option. Last recommendation is the now $31 Goblin Sharpshooter. This guy lets you completely control the board, picking and choosing what lives or dies. It's powerful, but you'll also end up holding games hostage, and that may not be the vibe that you want in your Commander games. Be sure to let me know in the comments if budget burn in Commander gets you excited or not. And if you're looking for your first deck and found it here, be sure to shout that out in the comments too. If you've made it this far, remember to like, subscribe, and drop a comment before you take the time to check out this video's sponsors like Card Conduit. They are hands down the easiest way to sell your individual Magic cards without the hassle of traditional buy listing. They'll get you top dollar while handling all of the heavy lifting, from sorting to grading to optimizing your price across a huge network of vendors. And they'll give you cold hard cash for it. You can use the promo code MECHANIC right now for 10% off of all fees. And if you want to pick up the cards for this list, make sure to go check out Card Trader. Use my promo code MECHANIC right now for 5% off your order from any TCG. Card Trader's zero system means you can get cards from all over the world with only one shipping fee. Save money and time today. Lastly, you can check out all of my decks on MOXFIELD. MOXFIELD is the best deck building platform in the world and makes it easy to build decks and search for specific cards with their powerful tools. Have you checked out their drag and drop feature yet? It's revolutionary. Be sure to check out my brews and follow my profile there right now. If you were inspired to brew today, you have to hit that subscribe button. Check out this other deck on my channel right now for more sweet tech. And as always, folks, good luck and have fun.